Um, Last week after this service, one of the dear ladies said that I talk fast, and I'm not sure where she got that, but I guess I've heard that before, and let me just say at the outset that I understand that people generally speak 180, 220 words a minute or whatever, but people can understand at a much faster rate than that if they concentrate. I will tell you, I start at about 415 and go to 500 with Gus. You know what I'm saying? So I get that, and if there's something that you miss or just don't hesitate to raise your hand and say, "Run that past us again," because that possibility exists. Almost every week, in fact, it has been every week, afterwards, somebody has commented on something that was said and raised an issue, and I didn't always have a ready answer. And last week, one of the things that came up was this Christophany. We talked about it in chapter 8, you recall, whether or not that the first person pronoun, the I, the me, was referring to Jesus, was a Christophany, or in fact it was something else. And so afterwards, we got to talking about it a little bit and try to come up with some Christophanies. In other words, where Jesus appeared in the flesh to someone other than but between the Advent and his ascension, other than in that period of time. And of course, there suggested Melchizedek, and you know what? I think let's take just a moment and run through I did a little research on that, and so Melchizedek would be the first one, or I believe it is, and that's found in Genesis 14, 18 to 20, if you're interested. That's, of course, when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. It's mentioned again in Proverbs, in Psalms, and 3 times or so, I think, in Hebrews, after the manner of Melchizedek. And so that's, most folks agree that it was Jesus appearing in the Old Testament as Melchizedek. A second one would be, and I have 2 little spaces there for you, as you can see if you have an outline. It's in the fiery furnace. Most folks believe that the 4th person in the fiery furnace with those 3 Hebrew boys was Jesus. I mean, it was he at the time, and so that's the second one. I think most folks agree on that. The third one that I found that some folks believe is a Christophany, in other words, Jesus appearing to someone other than during that period of time, was to Joshua. And for those of you that want to make a note, it's the references, and we don't take the time to go there, but I'm going to read it to you. It's Joshua 5:13, 14, and 15. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho, they lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua said unto him, Art thou for us or for our adversaries? You with us or you with the other people? And he said, Nay, but as the captain of the hosts of the Lord am I now come. And Joshua fell on his face and did worship, and said to him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place where thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so. Now the reason that some folks think that this was a Christophany is because Joshua worshiped him, and he accepted the worship. And there's no place in the Scripture we're told to worship angels. As a matter of fact, the preacher's going to get to in some of these days, in Revelation 19, 9, and 10, specifically John was told, don't worship someone who's an angel. So many people think that was another Christophany. The fourth one is the one I thought of, and nobody else seemed to think it was a good idea. And you know what? It probably isn't. But I'm going to give you a little logic behind this, because I'm trying to think, why did that come to my mind? And it was involving Gideon. Now, you see, Gideon had, of course, on more than one encounter over a period of a few days. And at least on one of those occasions, it refers to the angel of the Lord. I get that. But in Judges 6:14, here's what it says. And the Lord looked upon him, talking about Gideon. And the word Lord in the King James Version is uppercase L, uppercase O, uppercase R, uppercase D, which in the original suggests that it was Yahweh, or translated sometimes Jehovah. As a matter of fact, the new, just a second, let me get for the American Standard Version does translate it Jehovah. NIV also says uppercase L, uppercase O, uppercase R, uppercase D. And every other translation that I've been able to look at says the Lord. It would not reference anything else. And here's what he said. And the Lord looked upon him and said, Go in thy might, that thou shalt save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have not I sent thee? So that may have been a Christophany. I don't get any commission one way or the other, so but it's a thought. Now the last one is, and I used to have a question mark there, and this one here surprised me. But the for want of a better term, the basis for this argument or for this thought is John 1:18. No man has seen God at any time, but the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. No man has seen God at any time. John 1:1. And the Word it was in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Who was it that walked with Adam, or who spent time in the garden with Adam? And the answer is, I'm not sure. But I will tell you this, if no man has seen God at any time, Adam may have been walking with Jesus. And there's some folks who think that he was, and I'm, that one was a little past me. But if John 1:18 means no man has seen God at any time, then it probably increases the chances that it was that was a Christophany. I'm not sure. Anyway, I don't want to invest a lot of time in that, but it came up last week, and I thought I'd just spend a little time with it. Another thing that has come up is I have, beginning with the first week, said when we talked about a particular point, that's a major theme in Proverbs, and a couple of folks have raised an issue about, what are the major themes in Proverbs. And, of course, I'm going to tell you something. Anybody could divide them up any way they chose. These are the 5 that I generally have chosen major themes. And then you'll see I've listed them in your notes or your outline. The first one being wisdom is the principal thing. That's the reference for that, of course, is Proverbs 4:7. We talked about that a little bit. The second one, wisdom is available. Every single chapter we've had so far, including the one that we covered in other ways, that being chapter 9, all of them discuss the fact that wisdom is critical and wisdom is available. Those two things are major themes in Proverbs. They're just, that's you need wisdom, and it is available. There are conditions precedent. There are some conditions to getting it, but it is available. The third, fourth, and fifth ones that I have here are choices have consequences, deeds have consequences, words have consequences. Now, we've had several examples of that already. But the next 20 chapters, beginning with chapter 10, the format is altogether different. The next 20 chapters are the only ones that we believe Solomon penned. The last 2, somebody else, we believe. So 20 through 29 are additional Proverbs of Solomon, but they're done a little differently, and most of them fall in one of these 3 categories. Most of them talk about choices that have consequences, words that have consequences, deeds that have consequences. Now, the upside to all this is we've had some conversations about words that we want to be careful. Shouldn't say things. And incidentally, 5 of the verses we have this evening in chapter 10 deal with that subject, words and the mouth and the tongue. But the upside is there's some wonderful things that come through the choices that people can make. It's not just that you be careful that bad choices have consequences. Hello, class, good choices have consequences too. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad that good deeds have consequences too? And good words have consequences as well. So we'll see, or I presume we'll see as we go through these next chapters, that most of the verses fit in one of those 3. In other words, they're talking about choices that are made, deeds that are done or warned about or whatever, and encouraged, and the same with words. All right. Now I think we're ready for chapter 10. Now, it bothers my wife that I look at my watch so much, and you know what? It may bother others as well, but here's the thing. I generally know it's not 7:30. I really do. But I kind of pace myself. I mean, I generally know how far I want to go, and so that I don't, go too quickly or too slowly, I kind of pace myself. So I hope it doesn't make you nervous. If we had a nice big old clock in the back like I do in my classroom sometimes, I don't have to look at my watch, but that's fine. I'm glad I'm sure the preacher has it the way he wants it, and that's fine. But anyway, so please don't let that bother you. All right, chapter 10. Now, in chapter 10, I've said this early on, but the format of these verses is just different. There is now, for the championship of this sanctuary for 30 seconds, I have a question. Let's see who can get it. Not you, preacher. There is a word, a single word, that is in 26 of the 32 verses in chapter 10. It's in 20 of the 31 verses in chapter 11, It's in 28 of the 31 verses in chapter 12, the same word. It also appears disproportionately in chapter 13 and 14 as well. Does anybody know what that word is? You know what? Righteous, I'm sure, is in there a lot, but I doubt if it's in there that many times. I don't know that it is. Now you got me to go back. Hello, class. It's a really complicated word. It's but, B-U-T. You knew that, didn't you? Of course you did. Of course you did. Well, it's but. So these verses, by and large, are contrasts. They say this, but that. This, but that. This, but that. You look at the verses, that's the way they are. So that's the way that the Lord has communicated these truths to us. Some of them are real easy to understand. It's this, but that. I get that, and others are a little more obscure. And some of those we may come to, some of them we may not. I have chosen, for those of you that picked up an outline, I have chosen several verses. I've grouped them in subjects that are similar from this particular chapter, and if there's a lot of verses I did not choose. If there's one you see, and you're thinking, what about that verse? Just trot your hand up and I'll ignore you. No, just trot your hand up and we'll either talk about it this week or we'll talk about it some other time. Yes, ma'am. I thought you probably, okay? Okay? Well, we might be talking about the when he wrote on the wall. It was it's in Daniel when that may be, and I don't know whose finger that was, but we assume it was God's when he wrote many tarsi or whatever it was. He wrote, "You've been weighed in the balance and found wanting," is what it was actually said. So the answer is yes. There was a time someone saw a finger writing on a wall. We presume it was God's finger, but I'm not sure about whether that relates or not to whether anybody had seen God at any time. I presume that verse means what it means, and I don't know if we can go beyond that. All right. You're welcome. Chapter 1. Chapter 10, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, it's one of my chose. The Proverbs of Solomon, period. Okay, so these next verses are Solomon's Proverbs. It instantly says something similar in chapter 25, and of course we saw it in chapter 1. So these are among his proverbs. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. That's the verse. I've paraphrased it, of course, and here's my paraphrase. The wisdom of sons and daughters, or the lack of it, has an enormous impact on their parents. Now, I wanted you to I doubt if there's anybody here that has children is going to have any issue whatsoever with this point. But I'm going to stroke it because it's here. And that is this, that among the most miserable times a person can have is when their son or daughter disappoints them, when they mess up. I litigated a case once where a young man was killed, and we had a grief expert. I have experts for everything, a grief expert to testify, and he explained that how and for those of you maybe who've lost a child, you would understand this, but it's just like people don't expect to bury their child. It's almost unimaginable grief. But it's even worse, if you can imagine it, when the child is doing something that they should not have been doing, which was the case here. So you take the most horrendous grief you can visualize. It's even worse if the child has been unwise for some reason, or done something that's disappointing. On the other hand, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful day when a child chooses, when they do something that's edifying to the Lord, or when they do something that's an appropriate thing for a child to do. Now, I get this. I totally get this. There is no way, as far as I know, to predict that any child is going to always make good choices. I mean, they're children, for gosh sakes. You'll use your license as a child if you don't mess up sometimes. I mean, it's just part of it. I get that. At the same time, I recognize the importance of it, and I recognize the importance of it to grandparents as well, who interact with their grandchildren, aunts and uncles who interact with their nieces and nephews. That it is a totally wonderful thing when they choose to do, when they come to the place, they make some choices that are appropriate. Now, if we all assume that's correct, and it seems to me like, Charlie, I'm totally with you, my brother. We put the Lord first and our spouse second. But up there early on is that we set a good example for our children. that we teach our children the way that things should be done. Because they can, when they make good choices, when they make good decisions, when they have done things appropriately, it's a wonderful blessing. It's hard to describe how good that makes you feel. And the reverse is also true. There's a verse 5 that comes up in a few moments that kind of touches on this subject from a little different angle. But assuming we believe that it affects our sense of well-being, then it certainly is important. It ought to be important for us to do the best we can. Now, again, I recognize that kids do foolish things, and people do the very best they can, and kids do foolish things. Hello, class. Kids of all ages do foolish things, not just kids. At the same time, I try to say, what is there then? What is there? What's the best we can do? What is we can't guarantee it, but what's the best we can do? Well, try this on for size. Let it just be said that there is nothing that we could do to help direct them, give them wisdom, give them counsel. Hello, class, including by example. I promise you, what you do speaks so loudly they can't hear what you say to the contrary. That opportunities present themselves, we confront, we put them in front of people that are wise and give good examples. We have them involved with people that have wise things to say, and we also have wise things to say. We do our best, and then the next thing is we don't do anything to detract from that. We don't do anything that the child might say, well, that your parents are hypocrites or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to do anything to cause hindrance. No hindrance at all, and everything positive that I can. And then you know what? We leave it to the Lord. We leave it to the Lord, and we just trust the Lord. It'll be fine. But recognize this, please. When they do good, it's a great day, and there is no success. In my view, this is my view, there is no success that can compensate for failure when the kids cause heartache and grief. I mean, I don't care how strong everything is. The brightness, the shininess is gone if the kids mess up. So, given if it's that important, then we need to do our best to do what we can and be sure we avoid doing those things which would hinder. All right. That's verse 1. Now, the next subject here, I haven't grouped, is in chapter 4. And we've talked about this a little bit. In fact, it came up just a little bit this evening when going back over those things that the Lord hates. This subject came up, but here's what it says. The verse 4 is, he becometh poor that dealeth with the slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. Now, here's my paraphrase. Some consequences, both negative and positive, these are some of the consequences, both negative and positive, of hard work, or the lack of it. Now, we have talked about this a little bit, and, it comes up maybe 3 times in Proverbs and later chapters, and we won't talk about it every time we come to it. That's one of the things, I try to choose different places to talk about different subjects, but this, of course, is talking about industry. In other words, people, diligence. And of course, it's talking about, just anyone. But here's what this verse says, or I'm reasonably sure it says. There's a correlation between hard work and material success. Now, I recognize that people are unemployed for a variety of reasons, including some very good ones, and some people are underemployed for a variety of reasons, including some very, very good ones. I get that. I get it. At the same time, somebody may work, 70 hours a week or 80 hours a week. I'm sure we have some folks here that do, and somebody else works, 30 or 40 and does better financially. I understand all those things, but very few people, hello class, as far as I know, there is no profession where the less you do, the more you do, the more you get. I don't think it's like that. I'm pretty sure it's not. So there's a direct correlation, and here's the point. I do have one. it's important for those who come along behind us to understand this concept. Sometimes those who have gone before, parents, grandparents, intervene in such a way that that when someone is lazy, they don't feel the pain that they should feel when they're lazy. I don't. If there's somebody here that fits this category, I have no one special in mind. One of the advantages of not knowing very many people, I just step on toes and not even know there's a foot there. But I will tell you, when parents or grandparents are always covering for someone who should have done better, there's an opportunity to learn lost. There should be a cost associated, in my view, with lack of ambition. I think that, and I understand. People help, and people help in lots of reasons, lots of ways. Charlie, I'm having an idea what you were talking about necessarily, what some of the others are, but people have financial problems, and we've got some folks here probably that do. And not because you're lazy. I get all that. But there is a correlation between industriousness, industry, and assets. There is. And you know what? One more time, if it's kind of like the same thing, if I'm having issues, this should not be me. Let's not be because there was something I could have done that I didn't do. And neither do I want to take away a very important lesson from one of my children or my grandchildren. I don't want. If they need to learn something, if the Lord's trying to teach them something, then bless my heart, stay the heck out of the way and let it happen. If there needs to be some pain felt, then there does. There is a correlation. All right, but verse 5 says it's similar, of course. Well, not of course, but it is. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son. He that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. So the emphasis in verse 4 is on the individual who works or doesn't work. In verse 5, the emphasis is on those who are related to or associated with the person who works or doesn't work. In other words, when somebody doesn't, it causes shame. It just is. It puts a burden on people who are closely associated with them. You know what? People, for whatever reason, have shared a few things with me after some of these Wednesday night services, and there have been issues with children. I'm talking about grown children who in some cases have caused burdens, serious burdens on their parents or even their grandparents because of their own lack of industry, their own lack of effort. And many of you perhaps could attest to this or witness to this, but whatever the case, the verse 4 is talking about it's a problem for the person. They don't have as much as they would have had. And verse 5 suggests that extends to the people that are close to them, because sometimes they pick up the slack, and sometimes they have to. I understand that it happens sometimes, and I'm not suggesting that there's never a time when we help. But the person who lacks industry causes shame. So the verse again, he that gather. Okay. Actually, the paraphrase on your outline, if you've got one, yet another cause for parents to rejoice or grieve over their children's work ethic. The verse, he that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. That's verse 5. Verse 26 is something like this. And I don't want to spend much time with this one. But it says, as the verse is, verse 26, as vinegar to the teeth, as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to them that send him. We had this conversation once. This is the only thing the pastor remembered from one of these Wednesday night sessions. This is yet another reason why a lazy person makes a lousy employee. According to this verse, a lazy person is actually counterproductive. It's not just that they're not productive; they're counterproductive. And you just need to know, you've worked with some. I've had conversations with folks who've worked with people that are lazy, and it's almost worse because you might depend on something being done, or it's not being done well or done right or whatever, and a lazy person tends to either not do it or not do it right. And so this suggests that it affects a person's employment, which we've had a conversation about that briefly, but since there were 3 verses in this chapter all relating to laziness or industry, or then I said we'd run these by one more time. But this relates to allows the employee if it's a lazy person. All right. The next subject that I want to discuss is there are 2 verses, and one's 8 and one's 17. Now, again, those of you that have an outline, there is an italics at the bottom of that, and here's what that italics says, and I want to read that before I actually read the verses and discuss them. These verses have at least 2 applications, at least 2. One application is to evaluate ourselves, and the second one is to evaluate potential counselors. You recall the very first few minutes of our very first session, we talked about, one of the purposes for Proverbs is to for those who wish to attain unto wise counsel. That is to get counsel and be able to give good counsel. So these 2 verses here will help us determine. We can do a self-test, and then bless your hearts, we also can use this test to apply it to others to see who we should listen to. All right. The first one of these, verse 8, I'm going to read you the verse. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. Now, I have a paraphrase of that, which is your outline there. It was, wise men and women listen, while a foolish person can't help but babble. Now, you may know people like this. Hopefully one isn't sitting where you are, or standing looking at you. But there are some people who just don't seem to be able to listen. They just don't seem to be able to listen. They've always got something to say. They just want to talk. Sometimes it's relevant. Doesn't seem to bother them whether it is or not. They just want to talk. The people in my profession are accused of talking because I guess that's what we do. But some people, it's not just that they say things, because we see in a few minutes words can be good, but they won't listen. I've had conversations with people, you have as well, and sometimes they stop talking, but as I'm saying something, you know what's going on in their mind. They cannot wait for you to give them a break to get back in. I'm going to tell you something. That's a sign of a lack of wisdom. It's a sign of a lack of wisdom. Wise people listen. There are things we don't know or things we don't quite understand. And if we want to help somebody like Charlie, or we want to help somebody, then we need to listen. We need to listen. Wise people listen. If that's a problem for you, then bless your heart, you got some area for growth. Wise people listen. The other people, they just talk. They just talk. So it's a good thing to evaluate yourself. How am I doing? But also, I'm going to tell you something. When we go to someone for counsel, one thing I like about these 2 verses, and there are other verses in Proverbs as well, but one of the verses in chapter 11 talks about there's safety in a multitude of counselors. It's 11:14, as a matter of fact. There's safety in a multitude of counselors. Well, let me tell you something. I'm clearly not going to disagree with that, but I am going to tell you this. It's important the counselors go to. It's not just important to listen to someone. The shocking thing to me is that I know people who are very careful when they choose a physician. We were talking about doctors a little bit earlier this evening. Before the service began, they're very careful about that. They're careful about choosing the brand of milk, for gosh sakes, and yet they'll take advice from somebody who doesn't know diddly squat. I'm sorry. If you're going to go to someone for counsel, you should at least give as much attention to whether or not that person has a measure of wisdom. And one of the tests is, will they listen? Will they listen? A good counselor is a good listener. A good listener. All right, the second thing is in verse 17. He is in the way of life that keepeth instruction, but he that refuseth reproof erreth. My paraphrase of that verse, wise men and women accept criticism. The foolish, not so much. Not so much. Wise people not only listen, but you can tell them something and they'll accept it. I mean, in other words, you can say something to them and they will accept it as though they deserved it or they had it coming. Wise people accept criticism. I don't know how you are with that, but I would tell you it's one of the hardest things I think that anyone does. Once I know some people who do that just real well. I mean, they just, you can say something and you say it carefully, and you can whatever, and they take it real well. And I know some others, and you may as well, that just, they immediately, a wall comes up, they become defensive, and there's nothing you can say that will penetrate that wall. They will not accept criticism or instruction. They know it, and please don't try to mess them up with facts. Don't bother with facts. It's a sign of a lack of wisdom if a person cannot be reached, if you can't get to them, including with something they may not necessarily want to hear. Now, so there we go. Let's apply this test to ourselves. So how are we? Do we listen? And can somebody persuade us to something that we ought to hear and ought to accept, whether we choose to or not? In other words, whether it feels good or not. And I'm going to tell you something. When you choose folks to go to for counsel, it needs to be somebody who knows they don't know everything and can be corrected. And they listen. It is such a responsibility. I know you know that. It's such a responsibility when somebody who depends on us comes to us for counsel. It's one of the most sobering responsibilities I ever had. It was what drove me to this book initially. When I made the mid-career choice to do what I was going to do, I just didn't want to give bad counsel. And it is such a huge responsibility. I go to others for counsel, and I would tell you something, I need to be careful, and so do you. You choose them carefully. They need to be able to listen and be corrected. Okay? Are we good? All right. Here we go. I have these last verses, 19, 20, 21, 31, and 32, all relate to the same subject, and I'm going to do my best to cover them. All of these relate to the same subject. Verse 19, "In the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, but he that refraineth his lips is wise." My paraphrase, sometimes wisdom is remaining silent. It's just being quiet. Sometimes wisdom is saying nothing. It's better to say nothing. Better to say nothing than say the wrong thing for sure. And sometimes it's better just to say nothing. There have been times, that in retrospect, I said, man, I really should have said something. I really should have said something. But more often than not is, if I had just kept my mouth shut, just kept quiet. Sometimes wisdom is remaining silent. That's verse 19. Verse 20. "The tongue of the just is as choice silver. The heart of the wicked is little worth." My paraphrase, "Words of the wise have great value." When we got someone who has wisdom, when we got someone who is prepared to help us understand the perspective of the Lord, the way the Lord sees things, and we need to listen carefully. Wisdom has great value. The tongue of the just is choice silver. Listen. This, of course, and this certainly applies to anyone who looks for counsel. If you got someone who's giving you good counsel, listen. Just listen. And, be subject to correction. Verse 21, "The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom." My paraphrase, many can benefit from the words of the wise. Many can. I mean, lots of people can benefit from the words of the wise. They're really. It's not just limited to whoever the words are being directed to. Certainly, I wasn't supposed to guess how many people have read the words of wisdom that we're using here for this text tonight. But many can benefit from that. In other words, sometimes one person speaking wisdom can benefit a lot of people. And sometimes, hypothetically, if you benefit this husband, then the whole family's benefited by what this person says. Many are benefited by the words of the wise, can be benefited by the words of the wise. So it's important, clearly, for the person speaking wisdom to do it in such a way that it has a better chance of reaching beyond the one to whom you're speaking. So many can benefit. All right. Verse 31. The mouth of the just bringeth forth wisdom, but the froward tongue shall be cut out. This one applies, this one is not dissimilar from verse 20, but it's just another one talking again about words and the value of words, what they can be. My paraphrase is, pay careful attention to what wise people say. Listen carefully. Listen carefully. Listen and listen carefully to what wise people say. You know, I appreciate when people are careful about the way they characterize things, and I appreciate when people, you know, focus on what is said from this pulpit. I mean, I'm telling you, you're missing something special if you don't get what this wise man tells us. And Pete, I too had your outline pretty good. I thought that was good last week as well, although the preacher found a way to offend me by giving you some prompt, but that's good. I'm fine with that. But that was good. That was good. Listen carefully to what wise people say. I've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to spend some time on verse 32. I happen to feel fairly strongly about this verse. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness or perverseness. There are some thoughts, when spoken, are unacceptable. They just shouldn't be said. Now, I'm not talking about being quiet. I'm talking about there's some things that should not be said. Wise people know that, the wicked don't. You know, I want to tell you something. There is a best way to say everything. By definition, there's a best way to say it. I appreciate people who are careful about the way they characterize things that are really, really important. I appreciate that. Who think about it and they say it well. But I want to tell you something. In addition to that, I'm persuaded that this is that also covered in this verse, and I'm going to tell you what I think is included in this verse, and then I'm going to read it again and see if you can get that. I don't want to misuse the text. There has become a coarseness in our oral communication in public. There just has been. In entertainment, in the TV, there's just been a coarseness and a creeping in of unacceptable, in my view, characterizations of thoughts or ideas that should never have been said. They just shouldn't have been said. You know, I remember the first time I heard a curse word on TV. Shocked the living huff out of me. And I remember, when I was a kid, somebody saying a four-letter word that is fairly common, and somebody else rebuking them because there was a woman within earshot. She could hear it. How about that? I have to tell you, it shocks me to my core how coarse language has become. And it has generally been accepted. It's been a long time since I've heard anybody say it in the whole class, including me. Now, I have students sometimes who when they're practicing in front of a jury or arguing to a judge or whatever, will use a four-letter word, not some of them, but some. And you know what? And every single time I stop them and I say, I want to tell you something. There are probably only 6 people in this county who are offended by that, but your professor's one of them. Don't do it again. But I will tell you, it shocks me to my core the way that our language has degenerated and is generally accepted. It just is. I'll read the verse again. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness, perversity. I think it's talking about that too. I think it's talking about that kind of language. Now, I don't have any idea here if any of you have ever had an issue with that, or maybe somebody does, I don't know. But let me just tell you, I don't know anybody. I'm not saying there aren't people, but I don't know anybody that's not offended when those words don't come into the conversation. I don't know anybody. That's what I tell my students. I don't think there's a single person on any jury that's going to be offended if you don't say those words. But there may be one like your professor who is offended. Don't do it again. Don't do it again. Well, you know what? I have no idea, Charlie, whether they do any good or not. But words are important. Words are important. And that's one of the major themes, isn't it? So we'll have other opportunities for that. I mean, next time is chapter 11. Next week I've been called to Florida for a special event or whatever, so I won't be here next week. There'll be, someone else will cover something else, I guess. And of course, 2 weeks. There you go. So 2 weeks, of course, is missions. 3 weeks from tonight, Lord willing, we'll be back and we'll do chapter 11. And I've given you some verses at the bottom of the outline that I think we'll cover then. Preacher, you can close.
Thanks, Lee.